Good morning, Eric.
Good morning. Good morning. How are you all doing?
Morning. It's
Good
spring.
morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Let me spotlight myself. Welcome to our AMA. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Eric Johnson. I'm one of the main instructors at the Academy of Realist Art Boston, and I'm the main instructor for our online atelier, which we started after the pandemic. So those of you that haven't done the AMA, you're more than welcome to ask any question. Please put your questions in the chat and I will go through them all. The topic or a little bit of the focus today is going to be the online atelier, but please feel free to veer off from that and ask any questions you want. That can be drawing questions, painting questions, just about anything you would like. I see lots of familiar faces. Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Eric. Glad you're in the same time zone.
I know it feels great to be in the same time zone again. I was actually just talking with another student about that because being in Europe for so long, it's just a lot. It's very mentally taxing. People forwards in time, backwards in time. It feels good to be back home in the States.
Where were you, Eric?
We spent some time in Germany and then in Scotland, but we were in Europe for about 7 months.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow.
I have a question.
Sure.
I talked to Julie about it. I'm working on my graduation piece at ARA.
Wonderful.
I'm doing this portrait, and I wondered if I could come on Wednesday mornings.
Mm-hmm.
She said if it's okay with you, it's okay with her.
That's okay with me.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because I can't drag my stuff in here and do my, graduation piece at home. So.
I see we've got a couple of questions coming in. I actually want to ask Carmela, since you asked, and maybe anyone else who's in the online atelier, if any of you actually want to receive a critique today, like we typically do, if you're okay it being recorded and everybody seeing it, if someone wants to kind of join in and do a critique, I'd love to do one of those to show people who aren't aware of what our online atelier is like or how critiques go.
I have a piece I'm doing of the Gardner Museum if you wanted to critique that.
We could do that.
Wanted to,
We could do that. Also, the people that are in the online atelier, I know Lisa, you're coming very close to a final checklist. If you had some time to work on your barg, in the meantime, that would also
I'll
be
take a
good to use
photo.
too.
I'll take a photo for you.
Let me read through some questions. Hi, Lori.
Hello. I'm sorry. I'm totally new here. I don't know what I'm doing here. If I need to ask a question, where should I click?
On the bottom, there's a thing that says chat. You can type your question. You'll see a little like speech bubble. If you click on that, you should it'll open up the chat to the side.
Oh, so we type the question and you check later.
You can type the question, or what I can do is I could answer a couple of the questions that are already in the chat, and then I'll call out to you, and then you can just unmute yourself and ask the question.
Okay. Okay.
All right, good. All right. So Lori asks, hi, Eric. Got 2 painting questions. Formula for the quickest drying navy blue. Also, what do you think of pale drying oil mixed into stand oil? Would the secatives taint things negatively, or should I just use refined linseed oil? To answer your second question first, I would avoid secatives. I'm not a big fan of secatives because they just notoriously make your paint films brittle and lead to cracking. Cracking, mechanical failures in a painting are going to happen regardless. Painting on panel can reduce cracking. Painting on stretched linen, stretched canvas will increase the amount of cracking because of humidity and thermal conditions. Here in northern Massachusetts, it's obviously very rainy and wet, so that's a high humidity day, but it's also cooler. As temperature fluctuates, you're going to experience more and more of that cracking, but adding secatives in your paint do increase the probability and chance for that cracking to happen. If you're in a big rush for, let's say you've got a commission and you really need things to dry, there are other alternatives that you can use that avoid secatives. For example, you could use an alkyd. You could use something like Natural Pigments epoxide oil, or you could simply choose to use faster drying pigments in general. For example, I sometimes use cobalt violet pigment because it's a very low staining, not very high tinting strength pigment to speed up some of the drying time of things like quinacridones, ultramarines, alizarins, those kind of more dark, transparent, slow drying colors. Even black, so long as it can take a little bit of violet, that's a good way to significantly speed up the drying time. Even using things like raw or burnt umbers can increase or decrease the time that it will take for your paints to dry without some of the negative attributes of the secatives. So I would probably stick with just your regular linseed oil. If you're using stand oil and a secative, you'd probably be better off just using something like epoxide oil, which is a copolymerized linseed oil, which in kind of simple terms means it's a blend of linseed oil and an alkyd. So that will modestly speed up the drying time without giving you too much of the negative attributes of the secatives. The pale drying oil, to the best of my knowledge, the amount of secatives in there are very modest, but it will help speed up the drying time. Adding secatives to your paint is its direct. It's like there's whole science related to that. If you accidentally add too much of a secative to your oil paint, there's some chance or some probability that the painting may never dry. And the paint will take a ridiculous amount of time drying. So I'm not a big fan of secatives. There's sections of paint manufacturers who are very proficient, and they do a lot of tests to figure out each pigment and what type of secative and exactly how much is needed for a desired effect.
Okay.
Your second question, your go-to formula or your formula for a quickest drying navy blue, I'd probably just stick with cobalts and ceruleans. Those are going to help you speed the drying time up, as opposed to, let's say, ultramarine. You could possibly add in a little bit of Prussian blue or phthalo blue, depending on what your lighting situation or scenario is, whether you need that to be a little bit more of a green blue, or whether you need it more of a violet blue. You could even use, you could use a little bit of like a quinacridone to get that violet, but you do have some of those kind of negative attributes of its slow drying. That may be a good opportunity if you're in a very quick rush and you need a more violet hue to your blue, to use something like cobalt violet, because it'll dry real quick.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Borna asks, question on the online Atelier. How does it work? Is it a state recognized diploma, or and some things on admission? Would you like to unmute yourself to elaborate on that, on the admission? Borna, I think you're still muted if you're trying to talk. Oh, you're on a bus. That makes sense. Sorry about that. So it's not a state recognized diploma in the same way that you know, like an accredited college would give you a diploma, and it would have, you know, weights to become like a professor. What the Atelier, even the in-person, you will get a certificate of completion of the program, but you're not going, that certificate's not going to have the same weight as like a master's or a doctorate degree from a college. When it comes to admission, we are very approachable, very inclusive. We do not deny people based on their skill level or their level of experience. We are welcoming and accepting to anybody who wants to join us and wants to learn the craft. So when it comes to admission, what you do is you just go to the school's website, ARA Boston. Let me actually, I could put that into the chat in case anybody doesn't know what our website is. But I assume since most of you are here, there's a good chance you know what our website is. So our website is araboston.com. That in the chat. But yeah, there's a section for the in-person atelier, a section for the online. Hi, Julie. Julie's gonna set up for fall registration in the next few days, so we're gonna be opening up the fall registration. Right now, summer registration is open. The amount of our online and in-person atelier classes are less in the summer because we are hosting and teaching a lot of workshops typically in the summer. But in the fall, the online atelier is Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. In person, there are classes from Monday to Saturday. That's morning, afternoon, and we even have some evening classes too. Borna, I hope that answered your questions. You're welcome. Okay, so
Hey, Eric.
yes.
I just wanted to speak to the whole what do you call it? The certificate / accreditation type of
Yes.
thing. So one thing that I always like to clarify, especially if somebody isn't 100% familiar with what we do, is if people think of what we teach and how we teach it as almost like a trade school. And so what we're necessarily looking to achieve out of the program isn't necessarily a qualification at the end. The focus is really that we're building a tangible, usable skill set that prepares you to that you are able to start building that skill set from day one, and those skills are applicable to your own personal work straight out of the gate. So it's not like you have to wait to finish the program to be competent and capable to begin making additional work outside of classes. Whereas like the purpose of a university is mostly the degree. The purpose of our type of training is more the building and advancement of that skill set. So you kind of get what you pay for right out of the gate.
Thank you, Julie. All right. Mayra, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, puts in the chat, I have a lot of trouble identifying the color of lighter values. They usually look very grayish or white to me, and that's it. Do you have any advice for painting colorful lights? Mayra, can you unmute yourself? Would you like to, I may have some questions for you that you may want to elaborate on if you're still.
Yes, I'm here.
How are you doing?
I'm fine, fine. Thank you.
So are we speaking more of lightest values in general, or are we speaking more of like specular highlights? Little bits of what you would typically consider like the highlight.
No, like light values in general. Mhm.
I think there's a few answers to that question. One of them is if you're seeing them very grayish, or if in your painting they're getting very grayish, a good idea would be to drop the value range of your painting just in general. So making all of your darks just a little bit darker and bringing your highest lights in your painting just a little bit darker. As we get lighter in the value scale and darker in the value scale, typically what we can perceive, the chroma or the vibrancy of the color, decreases towards the lightest and towards the darkest values. In the middle, in the more middle range values is where we can physically perceive the highest degree of chromatic intensity. So there's a little bit difference in like your perception of what you're seeing and how to apply it on your painting. Now, there are instances where our pigments in our paint are not sufficient to have or reach a degree of chroma that we even physically perceive. In that case, you may want to do an abundantly or a very bright underpainting and use transparency in your paint to glaze over those highest lights so that you can have them be a little bit brighter and without ruining any or decreasing any of that chroma. In our Atelier program, both in the online and in person, we have a red, white, and green still life assignment, which is the assignment that we introduce underpainting and glazing to the students. What we do is, this is actually one of the paintings that we did for a demo, or that I did for a demo. Well, let's see if the camera can pick it up good enough. Let me see if, there we go. So the challenge, the difficulty in painting red fabric, there we are, is that red fabric has a tendency straight out of the tube. Let's say your cadmiums in, some primary red, they have the tendency to be quite dark straight out of the tube. What we do is we build up a very bright underpainting, and over a few layers, we glaze over that, letting the brightness come more so from the underpainting as opposed to adding white into the red. Because as you probably know, if you start mixing, white or very light pigments, that can have the tendency to chalk up the color or decrease the chroma. Mara, did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
So Eric, if you don't mind me just like butting in here.
Yeah, jump in. Yes, please.
So another suggestion I have, because I see that I have this challenge a lot with students who come into my color boot camp workshop, which is, especially if you don't have a really structured approach to using color and also like experiencing or like deconstructing why you see color a certain way. If you don't have a lot of experience with that, or you just are a little bit more self-taught, it can be really hard to put a definition on a color that's very low chroma, and that's like a very grayish color. So is it like a bluish gray, or is it like a greenish gray? Like that can be really challenging, right? Because your eyeballs are kind of constantly changing, and it's hard to nail it down. So one thing that I have students do is, especially when you're working on a project that has an area that's very neutral, so tans and browns and grays, what I try to do is I tell students to do something I call it like triangulating. What I do is I kind of find spots in the setup or the reference that the color of, that are really obvious, right? And so we do this a lot with cast drawing, because cast drawing and painting is working with a white object. So it's really hard to tell, like in the lights, it all just feels kind of gray. And so what I do is I ask students to look into areas where you absolutely know the color family. So maybe there's like a warm reflected light in the shadows, and maybe the background is more of a green. And then you find the color that you're not sure what it is. So by bouncing your eye between two things you know and one you don't, you start to get a feel for how that unknown color relates to obvious color. So if you're finding challenges in those neutrals, the second thing I would suggest is it's easier to figure out what it's not. So you just make a guess. So you're going to mix up kind of a gray, and when you put it down, don't just kind of keep going with it. You put a note down, you put a stroke down, and you step back and you look at everything. You're going to get a sense for this is too blue or this is too yellow, right? So you're going to get more of a sense. So it's one of my biggest favorite things in the school is I'd rather have you do the wrong thing clearly than to do an ambiguous thing where the right thing might kind of be in there. So make a singular stroke or a singular application and then step back and look. So I'd rather have it be clearly wrong so you know how to change it. So your definition isn't necessarily a direct definition. It's more as you're kind of coming from a reverse angle of like, well, it's not this. So sometimes it makes it easier for you to know how to change it. So hopefully those two things, the triangulating and the finding out what it's not, those two things can kind of help you define, especially in those really light values, like what's that slight shift or what's that slight hue that's like seasoning the lighter values.
Thank you, Julie. Lucy, how are you doing?
I'm great. I'm so glad to hear you're back in the US. Welcome.
Yeah, it feels great to be back. So you have some questions. You asked any advice for people starting out as full-time artists. You've had a hard time deciding if you should frame all of your work or if it's worth getting more expensive canvases. Are you talking about like gallery wrapped canvases that would incline you to frame them a little bit less? Or are you just talking about the quality of your working surfaces?
It's like the quality of my working surfaces. I feel like I can paint on any surface. Like I'll go to a cheap craft store and get acrylic primed, super textured canvas. I've also started experimenting with LC84s, which are like super smooth linen on aluminum backing. And I obviously love the super nice, stiff, high quality canvases, but they're so expensive. And framing my completed work is also really expensive. And I feel like, should I be investing more in these paintings if they're not selling yet? Like, doesn't make sense to do that.
It's quite a conundrum because you have to work within your means because you don't want to put yourself into debt for frames that you're not selling. So I think that a goal framing wise is finished corner frames. I would, wherever possible, try to avoid just chop and join. Those are moldings that come in big long lengths and they're quite literally chopped and joined together, and you can see the seam at the corner. Those typically make your work look just a little bit less expensive. It's kind of like a nice suit for your painting. You don't need to pay a ton to get a good finished corner frame, though. You just need to be looking for them. Even places like Blick sell finished corner like plein air frames, and even some floaters that don't have that ugly seam or that chop and join mark in it for really inexpensive. You're obviously not gonna find them from Blick in like 22 karat gold, but you can get them for under $100, and you can frame a lot of your work very nicely looking for not that much. I think that there's also some really good frame manufacturers that make finished corner frames where their primary market is us artists. So there's places like Masterwork Frames, which is typically a little bit more expensive, Vatican, which is more expensive, but Ashby Frames, his his works or his frames are a little bit more reasonably priced. He does these like every other week or so. He puts them up on Instagram. He does photos of them and people comment that they want them, and it's free shipping within the continental United States. But I've got a lot of frames from him before. Looking on eBay auctions, things like that, I'm always trying to search for inexpensive, high quality. I personally like a little bit more ornate, but each person's taste is different that fits their work. But I do think that framing is a very vital, essential part to selling painting, selling work. Because, imagine you're going into a gallery, you're not going to want to have to put in extra effort and energy to reframe or frame a piece that isn't framed. It would be nice if the piece was framed tastefully based on what you like, what you feel best shows your work. Neither going too extravagant nor too cheap or non-existent. Every gallery is a little bit different. I think that as you step into being more of a full-time artist, looking for a local gallery that can represent you, represent your work, and start building relationships with your local art community. Ideally, you start off very locally. You don't want to have to tack in the also added expense of getting gallery representation in another country or across the country, where it's going to, if you have to ship 5 or 6 paintings, it may be $400 or $500, depending on the size of the paintings, just to get them to the gallery. Then if they sell at the gallery, then if they don't, they may have to come back to you. So start locally, start small. Look for art associations. Look for art associations nearby that do group shows and things like that. But you also, with gallery representation, for the most part, have to be considering when pricing. Most often, the gallery is going to take 50% of the sale anyway. So scaling your pricing so that you don't end up selling yourself short when selling in a gallery. Sometimes I remember when I was, a little bit less experienced, I was very kind of nervous to increase the sale price of my works. But when I really just looked at it objectively, the time that I would put into it, the time and cost for framing, it's like, no, I can't sell a painting that I put 150 hours on and then spent $400 to frame it. I can't sell the painting for $600. I'd rather keep it at that point. But there's a lot of different moving pieces, a lot of cogs in the dynamic of stepping into being a full-time artist. If you're not a full-time artist, I'm a really big fan of having another income stream so that the whole picture making process and selling process is a little bit less stressful. Because if you're a full-time artist, if all of your money is coming from the sale of paintings alone, the economy changes, taste changes, and you can be on the wave of feast or famine, where I've had some times where paintings are selling very quickly and a lot, and then other stints where nothing is selling, where paintings are selling much less frequently. When it comes to surface, you should get the best quality surface that you can afford. If you really care about the longevity of your work, the best surfaces to paint on are rigid or hard panels. Aluminum, ACM, is going to be one of the best surfaces that you could paint on, be it with a linen adhered to it, or if that panel is just simply primed. That will probably give you one of the best options, not only for archival, but also space saving. Because if you've got a whole bunch of gallery wrapped canvas, those those start to take up a lot of space as you paint more and get a large inventory. But the very thin ones, the ACM panels, you could probably have 5 or 6 paintings in the same depth of that gallery wrapped canvas. Now, some people go with the aesthetic of the gallery wrapped canvas, thick, 1.5 inch, maybe even 2-inch wide gallery wrapped canvas. And that's cool. Paint the sides and you don't necessarily have to frame it. More modern works, more kind of contemporary modern feeling paintings, I think look much better without framing or even with a floater frame, which could also save you some money. Learning how to do things yourself also saves you a lot of time, a lot of money. So when it comes to the expense of those panels or the expense of those surfaces, you can see behind me this little thing right there. That's a big ACM panel. I bought a 5 by 10 foot sheet of it, and I can just cut it up, sand it, and prime it with a lead alkyd ground, and it's a beautiful lead primed, oil primed surface that is ready to paint within a week or two. And the cost for that panel is probably around $200. But 5 feet by 10 feet, that's a lot of panels. When you're buying panels that already have linen adhered to them, you may get a 16 by 20 for something like $50 or $60. So when you do the math, that saves you a lot of money. The other thing is, if you find you're already talking about certain types of linen that you like, oil primed linen, which I assume is Art Fix, that very smooth linen. That linen in particular isn't a cheap roll, but you would save money by buying an actual roll of linen and making some of your own panels or stretching your own. You'll end up saving a lot of money that way.
Thank you so much. That I have so many notes. That was super, super helpful. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Gilberto, how are you doing? You just moved to New Mexico and you're building a studio in a partition in your garage. Your question is, what proper paint color should you paint the wall? Ideally, not something like lime green, stark white, or what you want to avoid are very bright, very high chroma colors. So even white, I'm going to be painting my walls in the very near future a kind of a almost green gray, a color that I feel I like in just like halftones. I like seeing some greenish shades in portraits, and I like green in paintings just in general. You have to keep in mind, if you are working from life, whatever color you paint your walls will inevitably kind of creep or make its way into your pieces. Depending on your lighting is very important as well. I personally like these LED panels. This is a large panel from Newer. I can make the light a little bit warmer or a little bit cooler, a little bit lighter or darker. I connect it to a boom arm. I'll have a second one of those that may be for a portrait model, or that may be for sorry, I accidentally unplugged my computer there. It may be for your still life. It's nice to have one light for one and one light for another. Sorry, I unplugged my laptop, but I guess
You're
I
good.
can't find the hole, so I'm just going to leave it. It's fully charged. Relatively neutral. So if you have a preference for a red or a green, make sure that the vibrancy, the chromatic intensity of them are lower. They should be slightly in the neutral range, and make sure that the value is neither extremely dark nor extremely light, but in that middle range is very good. If you want little to no influence from surrounding wall color, you would probably be best to go towards darker values in general. When painting, especially, I have the tendency to wear black because in a in a fresh, wet painting, especially a larger one, if you're wearing a white shirt, you can see the reflection of yourself. That's also why when painting, I choose to use black gloves as opposed to white gloves or blue gloves. It's because the reflection of that goes into their painting, and it can be very distracting.
Okay, thank you.
You're very
That was
welcome.
very, very useful.
Good. Thank you, Lisa. Gilberto, you had a second question. You signed up for the online Atelier summer class. You spoke with me on the phone about it. I just want to have a notion of the program and what you can follow up on afterwards. So let's actually go over to our website, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what we teach at different stages of the in-person and online atelier. Give me just one quick moment to get there. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over to our gallery. So in the beginning of our academic or our atelier training, the very first thing that you learn is to copy site size at a 1-to-1 ratio. We start by working from the flat. The very first thing that you can expect to be working on. And after we talk, I'm actually going to give Lisa a critique so you can see exactly what you would expect one of those critiques to look like. So the very first assignments are going to be Barg. You're going to be copying Barg plates, site size. That's a 1-to-1 ratio using graphite, using only sharp tip pencils and no blending or smudging tools. That means no brushes, no hands, no stumps, but just your sharpened tool. These are some examples of student works. A good example of a level 1 Barg, this would be your first assignment, and there are 4 bargain assignments in total. This is the level 1 Barg, where we primarily introduce you to the way that we teach the construct or how to do a completed cartoon. This is an opportunity for you to really focus and study how to divide shadow and light and create some sense of the illusion of form just in the way that shadow and light are separated or divided. And a silly or a simple example that I like to give students is to think of this, which is it's a sticker. It's completely flat. It's got no volume to it. But if you were to draw, let's say, something like the letter H over it, and apologies for the crudeness of this H, but you'll get the point that we need no halftones, we need no extra rendering for the brain to start to perceive this as a volume, as a sphere, no longer a flat sticker. On opaque objects, transparent objects follow these rules, but just slightly differently because there's 2 sides to a transparent like pane of glass. But we study how light acts on form. On the exterior contour, we are very conscious to make sure that the exterior contour is either straight or convex. Very similar to what Da Vinci said, that the end of one form is simply the beginning of another. We avoid, when drawing our exterior contour, we avoid drawing any line from the outside in, or we avoid drawing any concave lines that may push into the form. But instead, we've got forms overlapping forms overlapping forms. We do not, in the beginning, draw with very curved lines, but we draw in straight segmented lines. That way we study the plane changes or the changes in direction along the exterior contour and division of shadow and light in the beginning. This allows us to segment areas. And when doing the drawing, we don't just beat one line to death where we try to draw it over and over and over again, but we look at it as series or segmented plane changes. And we can isolate and see when one is off, and we can take specific measurements just for that one to correct the area of concern. Our exterior contour must always be straight or convex, but never concave. But the form shadow has the appearance of being on round forms, concave relative to the exterior contour, let's say on this side, where our light shape is perfectly convex on all ends. That's, of course, concerning the form shadow, not necessarily the cast shadow. The form shadow is going to exist because of the, in most cases, we're using one singular light source in all of the bargs, casts, and still lifes, not multiple light sources. But when illuminated by a singular light source, the form shadow exists because the planar orientation of that form of the subject, it turns far enough away from the light source to be in shadow and receive no direct light. The cast shadow, if something was to obstruct the light, the image of whatever that object was would be projected or cast onto another area. For example, when you're playing with if you remember when you were a child or playing with children, you can do shadow puppets. You never question for a moment that the shape of your hand is going to be projected onto the wall. That's an example of a cast shadow. So it's important to remember that the form shadows have the tendency to hug and embrace the form. Meanwhile, the cast shadow projects the image of itself onto the form, and that has a tendency to distort, like longitude and latitude on a globe, the image of whatever was being projected. So the first barg assignment is, for the most part, a shape exercise where the values, we're only dealing with a singular flat value within the shadow, and then singular light white shape in the light. That's the completed cartoon. We do a value scale and gradient exercise. If you can imagine, we take any drawing and we strip it apart. The drawing is going to be made up of relatively flat values and gradated values in total. Those are your two kind of main options. The value changes gradually, lighter or darker, or it stays the same and stays flat. We also introduce big form modeling, which is our systematic way that we think about and work from general to particular, or from very simple to complex in the rendering process, where we give volume in a very broad, general way first, and then get more and more specific and more planar. The reason we do it in that way, not only is it a convenient way to create a very strong illusion of light, of the light effect and illusion of form, but everything that we do in the drawing part of the program directly relates to painting, because all of the drawing assignments lead to painting. So the way that we go about the drawing may not always be the most convenient. You know, you could get in there with a brush and smudge and all that, but that doesn't help prepare you better to be a more educated and skilled painter, when you need to be making the accurate value, color, chroma, hue shifts on your palette and bring them to your painting. You can't just blend and smudge everything into submission. So in the barg, we're very direct, and we do everything with those sharp tip pencils. So this is an example of your level 1 barg. An example of the lower or later level bargs. This would be an example of like a number 2, level 2 barg. Same thing here. An example of a level 2 barg, a level 2 barg. As the barg level increases, the complexity increases as well. For example, on these level 1 bargs, you'll notice that there's not a lot of information in the light family, not a lot of information in the shadow family. Definitely more than the level 1. But if you were to compare those to, let's say, a level 3 barg, like this, or this, there's a lot more subtlety, there's a lot more complexity. Some have a greater quantity of small shapes, some have a greater complexity and subtlety in the tonal rendering. One of the beauties about approaching academic atelier training is it is very black and white, no pun intended, that if it is big, it's big. If it is small, it's small. If it's light, it's light. If it's dark, it's dark. If it's too sharp, it's too sharp. And if it's too soft, it's too soft. There's little room for artistic interpretation in the beginning, where we're not making something lighter or darker or softer because we're putting some emotional, intent to it. Instead, we are using these, what they really were intended to be, observational training exercises. Some examples of level 4 bargs would be like this, or this. Much higher complexity of smaller shapes, much higher complexity of values. The value range within the light family and within the shadow family will be more expansive compared to those earlier level bargs. Here's another example of a level 4. That's very different than the earlier level bargs, where there's a little bit of information in the light family, a little bit of information in the shadow, but not nearly as much as those later level bargs. That once you do your 4 barg assignments, you move on from working from a flat to working from life. What we do is we work in cast drawing before moving to cast painting. You have 3 cast drawings to do. You have 2 charcoal casts on a white or a slightly off-white paper. And then you have a charcoal and white chalk cast as a drawing graduation piece before moving on to painting. So for the first time in the Atelier training on the barg cast and still life track, you will be working from life. So with this, especially in the online, this is a really big opportunity to set up the ideal studio conditions, setting up controlled lighting not only for the easel, but also for the setup, to where your easel light does not infect or disrupt the singular light source from the cast. In the cast drawing, this is where you will be taking all of your observations from 5 to 6 feet away, or 2 meters or so. All of your observations of the cast are taken from that vantage point. You can only take observations at that point. Yes, you can go up to your cast and study the topography of it, but most or all of those observations are taken from a distance. This is where you take all of those fundamental principles that you learned in barg and you put them into practice when working from 3-dimensional reality. So we do the exact same type of rendering process that we do in barg, with the exception of now we're working with charcoal. We use Nitram charcoal on Roma paper, which is a cotton rag paper that Fabriano makes. We use the smooth side of the paper, just in case you were wondering. A lot of what we do rendering-wise requires filling in the granularity of the paper or the granularity of the value. Because of the nature of charcoal, we do use blending or smudging tools, with the exception of smudging with our hands, because we would like to keep the oils or the grease of our hand out of the drawing. When working from life, it's a little different than working from the flat. When working from life, you have to keep in mind that you have human eyes that see things differently based on lighting scenarios. For example, we've all experienced walking outside of our dim home in a bright, sunny location where the sun almost punches us in the face and it's stark. Or You wake up in the middle of the night to grab a snack or use the restroom. You turn on your light, and it's a searing pain in your eyes. Your eyes dilate, your pupils dilate, or they constrict based on the lighting situation. So, especially when working from life, there is more observational management when it comes to what you're physically seeing, because in these assignments, you will be in a dark studio, a dark room, and with that, your eyes will dilate and you will see lighter values, because that's the objective. That's the purpose of our eyes, is to allow us to navigate the world regardless of what lighting situation we are in. So in this, we introduce more tools like using the black mirror and how to manage your observation so that you can visually see and create a consistent light effect and illusion of form. Before moving to painting, we do the charcoal and white chalk. That can be on a paper that you tone, or a toned paper that you buy. My preference is similar to what my preference is for a studio. Somewhat lower chroma or a somewhat neutral papers, I think, do best with the color of the paper. I sometimes find that if the color or chroma is a little bit too high, it makes it harder to create a more convincing effective form or effective light, because the vibrancy of the paper sometimes gets in the way because it's just so noticeable. Up until this point, you have been doing everything with a darkening tool. You've been using a light paper and you have been darkening to create the appearance of brightness. So on your bargs, you'll be using a light paper. On your first two cast drawings, you'll be using a light paper. But one thing that you probably know in paint is that we've got white paint, we have light colored pigments, and we have dark colored pigments. So the charcoal and white chalk gives you an added challenge, where we use charcoal as a stepping stone or a bridge to lead to painting, primarily because it has similar working properties that relate or are similar to painting. The charcoal doesn't always do what you want it to do. To perfect it, it requires a lot of micromanagement, in the same way that when you're painting, there are many instances where you are micromanaging the paint to create smooth, subtle transitions, or to make sure that the edge quality from your form is, or the exterior contour of your form is perfectly soft or sharp compared to that background. So it prepares you for some of those handling differences from graphite to charcoal to painting. Now, in the charcoal and white chalk on toned paper, you have the opportunity to lighten as well as darken. In the same way, in painting, you have the opportunity to lighten or darken. And in most cases, we are going to encourage you to do a imprimatura or a campitura, which in simple terms mean we're going to either do an opaque or a transparent, or like a stain. We're going to tint the white surface of the linen, because whenever we paint or draw on a very light surface, simultaneous contrast can make all of those colors or values seem darker than they rightfully are, until we cover up more of that surface. So in the charcoal and white chalk, you're introduced to a more additive and subtractive way of thinking, where we're adding light with white chalk and we're adding darkness with the charcoal. Do you or anyone have any questions about the drawing part of the program?
I have just a follow-up on what you just informed. Thank you very much. Very clarifying. But in this course that we are taking now, you're gonna cover all the barg stages, including the cast. Okay,
Yep, the cast drawings, and also
everything.
cast
Wow,
paintings and still life.
it's a lot.
It is a lot. It is a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, you will be. The good thing about the way that
Hey, Eric. So
Go
just to clarify, in terms of, yeah, so all of this is covered, including the painting program, but keep in mind, this isn't all covered in one summer semester or one semester. Like, the entire program as a whole, if you were to be doing this, the 3 days a week, we say roughly takes about 4 years. So what you're covering in one semester, the expectations we like to tell people is, if you're going to be studying with us for one full semester to start, I would say expectations would be to complete the first bark drawing and to possibly start the second one. So keep in mind that everybody's pace is really individualized because instruction is individualized, and you should be working your own pace. But if you continue to train with us semester after semester, you will progress through this program and you'll eventually reach that information. But just keep in mind that all of that is not just covered in like a single semester.
Thank you, Julie.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess I have other question, but I actually I forgot.
That's okay. It's okay. If you remember it, just let me know.
I'll write it down.
Then following the drawing part of the program, we start the cast painting part of the program. In the cast painting program, there are, once again, 3 assignments. We have a grisaille assignment, which is a achromatic or monochromatic painting. You would expect to do something like this, probably a more simple cast, primarily. If we primarily choose, in most cases, unless the student has a high level of experience in oil painting and are, good proficiency with it, the first cast painting has a tendency to be a little bit more simple. That way the focus can be more so on the handling of paint and the creation of the illusion of form and the illusion of light effect, along with all of the accuracy in terms of just shaping the overall size down to every last little detail without getting too crazy. Accuracy is paramount in everything that we do, doing it, exact to what we see. As after all, these are observational training exercises. But in this, you have the familiar territory of working on a strictly value piece. You have the unfamiliar territory if you don't have the experience in paint of just simply working with oil paint. The palette for the grisaille is lead white, raw umber, and ivory black or bone black. So with this, all of the same objectives that you had been working on in the previous assignments and the direct previous assignment, the charcoal and white cast, directly apply to this. Following that, we have a limited palette exercise, which in a way is a warm, cool exercise where you may have a green wall, but with the limitation in palette, our limited palette is lead white, yellow ochre, a high chroma and opaque red, such as cadmium red or vermilion, raw umber, burnt umber, and black once again. There's the common pigments from before, lead white, raw umber, and black. We have added yellow ochre, cadmium red, and burnt umber to the limited palette. So in this, we work together to create a setup that has a good variety of warmer and cooler shades. This not only is just a warm, cool exercise, but it's also a reality check that when your palette is limited, you may not be able to achieve the exact green or the exact color that you see. Instead, your focus is getting as close to it as possible directly, but also working in relationships, that this green is relative to this bluish gray is relative to this orange hue. So it's important to note that although we live in the 21st century and we have a lot of very high chroma pigments, there are some instances where you may aesthetically choose a limited palette, or there may be some colors that you can physically perceive with your eyes that you can't quite achieve with mixing in paint. Where we try to not focus on things like glazing too much with something like the limited palette exercise. In the cast painting, we introduce you to our systematic method, which has its origin in French neoclassical painting. The stages of painting are dead color, first painting, and second painting. So we go over a systematic method, which is similar to the exact same way that we teach drawing. So that's what you can expect for the level 2 cast painting. Let me see if I can find another. Here's another example of a limited palette where we've got these modest oranges. We've got warmer and cooler shades. Following that, we've got the full palette. This is where there are no limitations on your palette of choice. We work together as student and instructor to choose a good array of pigments or choose a good array of colors that are sufficient for the setup. We ideally only want the pigments and colors that are necessary and needed, and we get rid of pigments and colors that are not needed to achieve what we see in physical reality. So if there is the need for phthalo blue, phthalo green, cadmium orange, whatever it may be, this is the opportunity to bring those out. In the beginning or in the cast paintings, all of the same value and form illusions are the same from the earlier assignments, but in the painting part of the program, this is where the focus is more so on in the introduction and thinking of color and space, what is possible with the pigments that we have available to us, and a systematic way of thinking of hue, value, and chroma in relationship to each other. That those are the 3 aspects of color. And with that, we can take a very, practical, pragmatic way of mixing paint on our palette and organizing those colors on the painting to copy what we see. Following that, we have the still life part of the program. In the still life part of the program, we have 4 assignments. We have the red, white, and green assignment. This is where we branch off from working on the matte surface plaster casts. In the plaster casts, in the cast parts of the program, there is the challenge of painting a white object and drawing a white object, which, as we talked about a little bit earlier, has some problems perception-wise, where there are many instances where the colors may appear a little bit gray or low chroma. We spend time creating the illusion by working the value relationships, but also in painting, even in the cast paintings, we work on creating a array of chromatic grays, or we introduce color to those colorless objects. That those colors come from the lighting situation, the light source, but also the environment that is surrounding. For example, the greens or the reds surrounding color that bounces, or there is reflected light within not only the shadows, but in the light family, which gives a noticeable hue shift, color or chroma shift in that object. In the casts, you're working from plaster, which means, in other words, the plaster casts are matte finish. They have no specular highlights. In the beginning of the still life paintings, we require the white object to be a glazed, smooth, porcelain-like white object, because it forces you as the artist to as an artist to make room value-wise for the specular highlights. In the casts, drawings, and paintings, you can reasonably key up your cast drawing or painting to be very luminous and very bright. But when drawing or when painting a glazed or a more shiny white object, you end up having to darken the values of the lightest values to make room for that specular highlight, that little ping of light, to be bright enough in value relationship. This is also an opportunity to deal with the challenges of dealing with red, which, as we talked about earlier, has the problem of turning pink and going very low chroma if any white pigment or any white paint is added into that. So what we do is we do a bright underpainting and glaze over this with opaque or transparent pigments. If we're using an opaque pigment like cadmium red, we amend the paint with other transparent pigments or dilute it with some oil and apply it in a very thin and stain-like manner so that we can get a higher chroma, lighter value red. We also have a green object within that red, white, green still life assignment that acts as a complement to the reds that are achieved, where when glazing, you may not achieve the exact red that you see in life because of the limitations of just the glazing in general. But the green must be in good relationship to the slight difference in hue that may be there in the red. However, we are doing our very best to make that red fabric the exact hue that we see. But because of the limitation, there may be a slight difference. The following assignment is the tenebrism assignment. This is sometimes used tenebrism, sometimes used synonymously or confused with chiaroscuro. In this assignment, in the tenebrism assignment, the tenebrism is usually a darker valued piece, a little bit more dramatic, a little bit higher contrast in general. In this, we use the light source as a compositional element to where not only the objects are very thought out and placed, but also the shaping of that light object or the shaping of pattern between our shadow family and our light family is used as a compositional piece. So we spend a lot of time making notans and creating a interesting pattern of shadow and light. There's the added challenge that we require in the tenebrism painting is that's also having objects that are sitting deep in space and dimly lit or not very illuminated. You can see there's a little note on the wall. We want to get rid of the tendency to associate darkness with too much of a lack of information value-wise, where there's still information as we transition deep within the painting into that realm of shadow. You can see there's a little note on the wall that there's quite a bit of information even in those darkest values. Following that, we have the perishables assignment. This is an assignment where, for the first time, you're having to deal with objects that change over time. You may have flowers, or you may have fruits fruits or vegetables that rot or wither away. Your cast drawings, your cast paintings, your bargs, they don't move. That's one of the things that we hope they don't move. But with the perishable, what you need to do is almost on a routine basis, replace the objects and create a convincing, effective light, a convincing form that gets to kind of like the archetype. What makes a plum as opposed to a peach, as opposed to a nectarine? What is the difference between a beefsteak tomato and a Roma tomato? That you can identify them. There's a very specific quality and character in their shaping and in their hue and color relationships. Obviously, this cilantro, which I assume it is, those leaves are going to be different almost every single time. And you, as we all know from cooking, those won't last very long. But we do need to replace it because these paintings will take time. They will create, they will go. This is also a really great example, just to go back, of a recent red, white, and green object. But those perishables, they are going to have to be swapped out. Yet you have to keep adding in those objects and rendering your subjects to be a realistic representation of a peach, a nectarine, or a peony. Following that is your graduation piece. Here's another great example of the red, white, and green. Your graduation piece can be anything that you'd like. This is a opportunity for you as an artist to kind of show the instructors that you are proficient, that all of the training leading up to this, that you can do, you can compose and do a highly realized rendered painting using all of those tools and systematic methods, for the most part independently, with minimal critique or with minimal direct guidance, wherein the previous assignments, there's more of a there's a little bit more guidance in the instructor of introducing the exact systematic methods and what you should do. In the personal still life, it's this is actually a painting from one of our former instructors when she was a student, which she was an abstract artist before coming to us, and she did this painting as a kind of a fusion using these acrylic plates of abstractness and realism. But this is these are examples of graduation pieces, which you can see are wildly different. This is where you can really let your personal tastes, preferences shine for the type of work that you want to do in the future. When I was a student, I'm very much interested in pigments and making my paint, making pigments. This for me was my graduation piece, dealing with genuine vermilion or cinnabar vermilion, cinnabar lacquered ginger jar, and ultramarine blue. One of the main focuses that I had here was having the same colored objects, blues, reds, but them appearing very different. For example, the gold here compared to the corks, the reds here compared to this velvet. But yeah, those are the main assignments on our core curriculum for the Barg cast and still life.
Thank you, Eric. I don't mean to hog here the question things, but I just want to understand better about the fine line between online and presential classes. Okay, like when my worst dilemma is that living here in New Mexico, I was living in Texas before, we don't have ateliers, we don't have a place to go to learn this stuff, right? So that's why I'm trying to engage into this kind of classes. So I would learn the most, everything that you practically lecture us now in the past 15 minutes. But I think it's quite impossible to have everything done like from the corner of my garage. I don't think it's going to be possible to do the whole program unless you tell me, oh, there is a way to do that. But
Are you,
yeah.
Are you saying that time-wise, or you just space-wise, or you
not
just
time is that fine line between doing things online and doing that in an atelier like your location there, like with the instructor coming to you and correcting what you're doing. That part, I don't know if it is gonna be possible to do that, the whole thing online. I mean, in a complete way. Okay, so yeah.
It's surprising. It's surprisingly, I think, better than you think. Let me
Really?
actually let's jump in. Lisa's working on her barg. Why don't we jump into a critique so you can see how, let's say, a barg critique would look.
Okay.
And I'd also like to just put in my 2 cents on that. And so we have had some students who've been with us since the inauguration of this program, which was over the pandemic. Something good did come out of it. And we're finding that there's actually significant benefits in some ways that the online program can be stronger. And part of that is because of the experience of the class format, which would be you're in this Zoom with a bunch of people. And what you're going to be seeing here with Eric critiquing Lisa is the format of the classes. And the beauty of this is, even if you're a brand new student, you're actually watching and you can fully understand what Eric is talking about when he's critiquing a more advanced student. So you're actually getting exposure to a lot of information, a lot of context for the things that you're learning at the very beginning. Those things happen actually a little bit faster because you have the added value of being able to witness and learn from other people's critiques, which in person we absolutely recommend. But do people do that? Not always. So the students who are in the bar room do not always come upstairs to the 3rd floor or 4th floor and watch other people's critiques when they're working on casts and they're working on painting. So they actually are a little bit at a disadvantage because of that. I can't make them do it, but the online program actually has that built in because of the format. And we've had, again, a couple students who have been really sticking with us since the beginning. And one of them has also had the benefit of not only doing online, but she's been able to come in and study with us maybe for 1 semester in person, or we've had other people just come in for a workshop here and there. And they're actually really surprised at how parallel the training is. And if you're somebody who's self-motivated and is somebody who's self-motivated and who is able to, at least just put some dedicated time in each week, you're getting the exact same training. Would it be easier for us as instructors to be with you? Yes, but we've made a lot of the process and a lot of the instruction, a lot of the tools that we're now using in both online and in person, like videos to prepare you for things. It's surprisingly very parallel to what we do. The biggest difference you're going to have is the lack of a live figure model. Honestly, that's really the major difference, is the fact that you won't be working with a live figure model with Eric. You can still work comparatively. You can still do the figure assignments, but you may need to work from like a self-portrait for some of the projects, or you just don't have access to us being able to critique you with a live model. I would say that's the biggest difference.
And I am very open for those that do the figure part of the program online. If you can hire a live figure model in your own studio, which, as an artist, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's a phenomenal idea. The model obviously would need to give consent for me, who is not the artist in the studio, to see them, critique them, all of that. But I'm definitely open. And as Julie said, that's the main difference. What we do in the figure part of the program is we primarily work from photographs. We primarily work from master copies. I think I shared with you some of Sabina's work that she was doing. But yeah, I think the thing to realize is we didn't make an online atelier. We didn't sit down and think about how to make an online atelier. The pandemic happened, and we did the online atelier just for our students. So we weren't trying to reinvent it. We weren't trying to change anything, and we still haven't really changed anything. I was one of the main instructors in person for Bardcast Still Life and Figure. And then because just because things how they went out, I just decided to continue the online atelier because we had people from all around the world that were now training with us. And you know, I saw a lot of positive attributes of just the online. I really wanted to grow it and continue it. But I'm not I'm not like a special online atelier like hired instructor. I went through the program. I completed every assignment that I'm teaching as a student from ARA Boston. I became one of the main instructors, and then pandemic happened and we all taught online for a period of time, and then eventually the world returned back to normal and all of the other instructors continued in person. I moved out of state, out of country, back to Boston or back to Massachusetts, but still continuing the online atelier. So it's all of the information that you get is exact to what we teach and what I would teach in person. Now, what Julie brought up is a very good point, that on in person, which you should come, you should find a reason to come to Boston, all of you, and visit us. But in person, we have 3 floors. We have 3 floors. The beginner students in the figure room is on the first floor, and you ascend as you get more and more higher advanced in floors. But Barg students have the tendency to just hang out and stay with other people. You could imagine in person, you would be on the second floor doing Barg, surrounded by 4 or 5 or 10 other people that are also doing Bargs at different levels. On the second floor is our cast hall. We've got a whole wall of students doing cast drawings and cast paintings. And in the top floor, and there's also a mixture of still lives in there too, but on the top floor is a little bit more of the advanced students, still life painting. Now, it's sometimes intimidating to follow, or weird, that students feel, to follow the instructor around while they're doing critiques for higher level students. The beauty of the online, like Julie was saying, is I'm critiquing students that have been doing this for years. And I'm critiquing students that are doing it in their very first trimester. So right from the get-go, you see the type of information and the systematic method that I'm presenting to students that are very advanced, which you may not even know exists in person unless you were following Julie or Garrett or John around on some other floor. So that's a really added element. We also do a lot of demos. For example, that painting that I had shown earlier was from beginning to end was recorded as a demo for students. So every paint stroke, every palette mixture is all recorded there, and that's in our demo folder for our students. We have well over 100 hours of videos just of demos and things for students. We have a whole students only page that has lots of links of process, materials, all sorts of stuff. Julie, let me unpin you. Lisa, are you there?
Yes, I am.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well.
Give me just one moment. So when you are an online Atelier student, we've got a Google Drive folder. This is where some of our demo videos are. We've got construct examples, figure demos, miscellaneous. These are things like editing photos, doing sgraffito on frames, stretching, making panels, shadow boxes, making a website. In painting, we have everything from that red fabric glazing demo. These are all of these are all 6-hour demo days. But everything from varnishing, flowers, skin tones, alla prima, things that we don't even typically teach in the core curriculum are covered as demos. Same thing, drawing, they're separated in carbon, graphite, charcoal, lots of demo videos to fill in some of the gaps that we don't typically teach in the Bardcast Still Life. But all of the students have a folder with their name on it, and this is where they will upload their photos for review and for critique. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Lisa's. So there are two main methods that I critique students' works. One of them is through using Zoom, where I can take a measurement. In person, I would pick up a needle and actually take these measurements, but I can also take these measurements on Zoom. I could do this and say, the distance from the bottom of the barg to the nose is just a little bit low on yours. You would need to bring the nose up. I could check measurements. I could also leave notes, labeling what needs to be done. I also can draw on and write. For example, I can point at things. Ooh, that's a little bit thick and heavy. For example, here, this needs to be darker. So Lisa, this plane, I'd like you to look at this here. I think that the form of the forehead could be a little bit stronger. I still think that you're going to want to look at these two values here and here and darken those. With that, I would also relate the neighboring value relationships. If these values get darker, you're probably going to want to also darken the neighboring ones, because you'll find that there'll be a little bit high contrast following that darkness. So make sure to work on the transition as you darken leading out here. The other way that I can critique photos, I'm just going to save that as a screenshot. What I do also is I save these as screenshots. A critique isn't this quick, by the way. I just want to make sure that I make time for everyone's questions. But what I would be doing is I would be dropping screenshots in there of any of those changes. Now, the other way that I would critique people's work is I would download their image and I would open it up in Photoshop. And in that, I could more directly show exactly what changes need to happen, as opposed to just saying this needs to be darker or this needs to be lighter. What I can do is I can go into Photoshop, and this even applies in painting where I can make things lighter or darker. I have a pen and a tablet that I'm drawing on. But for example, what I could do is I could say, Lisa, these shadows are just a little bit light. What you'll want to do is make them just a little bit darker. And you can see that with this darkening, you'll need to darken the neighboring halftones. This in between would need to be made darker. And this plane here is going to have to bump down or darken a little bit more in the value scale. I noticed this small light moment in your drawing here. The lightest moment belongs more so to the left. On yours, I see this light moment approach a little bit too close to this shadow on the neck. So I do think that it would be a good idea to do some filling in and darken that while also softening that bright moment so it doesn't look too stark and separate from the rest of the areas. I also notice that underneath the chin, or underneath the jaw or the mandible, the value here is still just a touch light. You will also want to do a little bit of darkening there. With that, I think you'll also notice that the value relationship between this halftone, this darker halftone, and the shadow neighboring it, I would attempt or try to darken, fill in and darken this shadow underneath the jaw a little bit more than you have. You have a similar issue or a similar problem happening here, where I do think that this is just a little bit light still. And what you'll want to do is darken these planes, darken the darkest point here, this very dark halftone or shadow, and also darken the neighboring halftones to go along with it. I think that you'll find that with those slightly darker values, same thing is happening around the nose and around the mouth. If you give me just one moment, what I'll do is I'll show you what these corrections look like before and after. You'll get a stronger sense of turning of the face plane. So look at it before and after. So I think you could spend some time on this area here. That is the point on the form that turns away from the light source more. I think your shadows can be just a touch darker, and make sure that when you are darkening your shadows, you're not darkening them all to be as black as your 2B pencil can go, but study the difference between one shadow and another, where would be the darkest part of the shadow and where could be a little bit lighter in relationship. So do avoid the tendency to over darken these shadows as well. At this point, a dialogue, a conversation opens between myself and the student. I ask if there are any questions, anything that they want to talk about. If there's a shape that's off, I can even come in and we'll just use this as an example. If this shape was too small or too large, I could show exactly what that shape looks like. Ooh, let me open up a new full opacity layer. I could draw in a smaller shape for that. So the student can see exactly what I'm speaking of when I tell them that they have to make a shape change. I can physically make the shape change so they can see it on their own drawing.
And that is always helpful.
And then what I will do is I save that as a screenshot and I drop that into the folder in their Google Drive, and then they work on it. You would expect to receive a critique in the morning and a critique in the afternoon. So we have a morning session and an afternoon session in each of our days of the Atelier. The same thing applies in person as does online. In person, the instructor will go from person to person. In the online, students raise their hand virtually or unmute themselves or put something in the chat like many of you are doing, so that I am aware that you're ready for a review or ready for a critique. Thank you, Lisa.
You're welcome.
I see we have a few other questions. Thank you for putting some of these things in the chat for me, Julie. Julie makes a very good point that Jerry has a ton, and standard size equals cheaper framing. Very, very true. If you draw or paint in standard sizes, framing is significantly less difficult and less expensive because you always have to do more custom. Jean, I see you have a couple of questions. That's an interesting phone app. I'll have to give that a look. Jean puts in the chat, I'd love to share a phone app that has been amazingly helpful, for me anyway, in seeing color in minor color tone value color shifts. It's free and it's called I Love Hue. That's love with L-U-V. For those of you watching the recording after who don't see the chat, just want to make sure I read those for you. Okay, Jean asks, you have a art adjacent question. How do you go about naming your paintings, and do you think the name has an influence on potential sale? Julie, if you're still around, I'd love to give that question to you.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Yeah.
I feel like I'm a little biased because I love titles. I honestly don't think it has any impact on sales, but when I feel like it's an additional opportunity for an artist to give another layer to their painting, right? So we use composition, we use design, we use the content, all of these things are kind of breadcrumbs to what the piece is supposed to be. And I feel like the untitled or just random numbers does a little bit of a disservice. And so I find that I personally just feel strongly, I enjoy it. I have a collection of, I call them orphan titles. So it's a document where it's kind of like if you hear a phrase and you're like, that would make a cool band name. I do the same thing, but with titles for paintings. So I have a list of orphan titles. And what I found is actually really interesting is I will have a painting or two where I'm not really sure what it's about. I like the design. I think the setup is great, or the, you know, even if it's a portrait, and I'm like, I just like it. It just looks cool. If I go through my orphan titles, and sometimes one or two will really jump out as being connected to the piece I'm working on, and it almost inherently gives the painting its purpose in a way, which is kind of woo woo. But at the same time, I do feel like we're, as artists, we kind of are out in the world looking for connections, and we're creating things and trying to, you know, bring a new visual experience to the world. And sometimes I just, that's the kicker that really puts all the puzzle pieces into place about what this painting is about, or the issues that I'm trying to like address in it. So the titles are kind of this, not only a way to kind of add another layer if you already know what the painting is about, but it also sometimes allows for you to find a specific meaning, or kind of illuminates really the thing that made sense to why I felt like it needed to be made. So again, a little bit of woo woo, but I do think titling can help the viewer. You know, ideally, it has to live independent of the title and independent of what the original source was. Like the piece has to live on its own. And that's the most important thing. But I do feel like it's another like fun way to add an additional layer or to reinforce the original intention. But sales, I don't think has anything to do with sales unless you title it like something super rude. And that might be a bonus.
Or like
or
for
it might be a
free.
turn off.
No, I
Like-
mean, I named, I was working on something once, and it was water, and I was listening to jazz, and so I called it Kind of Blue. And somebody said to me, well, actually the person that bought it, oh, are you into Miles Davis? And I said, well, oddly enough, I was probably listening to him while I painted that. And then the whole thing got moved into this like music end, and they purchased it. But I think because the title spoke to them, I don't know.
Yeah, exact. I mean, so okay, what you just said right there speaks to more about than a title than it is to a collector's relationship to art.
Mm,
And so when she had that conversation with you, there was a connection. So the piece itself it connects with the viewer. And it could be because of personal experience. How often have I gone to an opening and I have a discussion with somebody who it was just at the opening, and then that person ends up buying a painting because they feel like they have a relationship, they have something deeper in there that they connect to.
right.
And that's why the sale happened. It's because they liked the work. And then there was this kind of added motivation, which is this connection with the feeling, the jazz, their conversation
or-
with you.
Right.
It's
They
more
like,
about
we
their
have something
relationship.
similar
Yeah.
in Mm.
Mhm.
But then you'd have to be there. That's also
It
something.
helps. It
Mhm.
helps, but again, that's also the job of the gallery director as well, is to inform you know, if the person is asking questions about it, if it's a good gallery director, they know you and they can speak to, well, I know Julie does this, and I know that this was originally because, you know, this was titled when they were listening to, you know, a lot of times good gallery directors will get to know you and be able to communicate that. Otherwise, sometimes the title can be, again, that breadcrumb to something that forms that connection without you even there. So had they just heard the title and they have a connection to Miles Davis, you didn't plan that, but maybe that's part of the reason they purchased it. So I don't think it's like, I think you should just, you know, organically feel what feels right to you for the title for the painting. But I do think having a title is a good additional layer.
Mhm. Great, thanks.
Thank you, Julie. We had a question about when doing the bargs at home, where, you know, what is that like? And I wanted to take a moment to show what our students only page would look like. So we've got our students only page, which students log into. And in this students only page, this is where we've got, you know, some registration things, our year-end review signups. That's where we take some time to spend with each student and talk about the work that they have done throughout the year and the trimester. We've got links to photos of stages, but also files for print or download, all of the things that you will be needing in your assignments. We've got instructions and we have folders that have all of the images that you'll need in high resolution with instructions on how large or small to print them out. And also what finish and what type of paper would be the best for what we're doing. I see also Michael has a question for people who might consider themselves more self-taught. Is there anything that stands out for you that you wish you would do or pay more attention more of, or pay more attention to? Julie gives a really good answer that many of us came to training being self-taught. The biggest info that has made a huge difference is an understanding of light logic. I second that 1,000%. Julie was self-taught before receiving academic training. I was self-taught. Many of us were self-taught prior to receiving academic Atelier training. And yes, understanding of light logic, that's some of what we were talking about even in those earliest assignments in the BARG, when we're talking about the construct and doing the cartoon. We really study how the division of shadow and light looks on three-dimensional forms. And we also put a lot of effort into studying and creating a mental or conceptual image, even when the visual reality leaves us in a point of lack. What that means is, in life, I want you to let's say, if you look at my head, there's a light line around it. And in life, you'll see things like that light line. And in a photograph, you would see things like that light line. But us as educated, experienced artists, we spend a little bit more effort and energy studying light logic and thinking about the way light acts on form in three-dimensional reality, three-dimensional space, and how to create the illusion on a two-dimensional surface, being your canvas or your paper. That in a different context, that same light edge is actually quite dark. I haven't changed the lighting, I've just changed the background. That is an optical illusion called simultaneous contrast, which gets you, as a self-taught artist, it usually burns you a lot, because as you're self-taught, you get somewhat proficient. You can get quite good just copying things, doing things as they're seen. But that may not always be the best choice, because you have to think of, you sometimes have to think of things in a different scenario or in a different context. So when we are going about the rendering aspect of our drawings concerning light logic, we always are considering the proximity and orientation to the light source. Proximity being wherever the light source is is the light source closer or farther away? Orientation being, how are the planes, if we're to just think of how they're simplified, how do those planes turn towards or away from that light source? For example, if I were to take this box and turn it down, it is turning away from the light source. As I turn it straight to the camera, it's more facing towards. But as I turn it up, it gets brighter. It gets darker as it turns down. It gets brighter as it turns up. But if I were to use this same box, I'm using the windows as a light source right now. If I were to get farther away from those windows, because I'm farther away in proximity, the light source becomes more and more dim. For example, even if you were to just look at me here compared to back here, I'm farther away in proximity. Oh, the camera's going to adjust. But my hand is always going to be brighter closer to the light source than farther away, even if they have the same orientation. We focus on that a lot, especially in the figure part of the program, when we consider the proximity and orientation of the light source based on where the lighting is coming from. Of course, singular light source. Closer to the light, facing the light is going to be brighter. Farther away is going to be darker. With that, that alone can get you extremely far and give, illuminate so many subtle differences that you can and should make value-wise, that when doing a portrait, the value of the forehead should, if the light source is coming from above, be brighter than the cheeks. And the cheeks should be brighter than the chin, and the chin should be brighter than the neck. That there's a fall of light, that light diminishes as it gets as the subject is farther away, or as the planar orientation turns away from the light source. What is the exact difference between tenebrism and chiaroscuro? I would say that tenebrism is a little bit more of a style, and chiaroscuro is more of a term that relates to contrast between light and shadow. So we could say that in, if something has good chiaroscuro, there would be a little bit of a higher contrast, think of Caravaggio, between the light family and the shadow family. In tenebrism, generally speaking, they're a little bit more moody, deep and dark paintings with a focused, almost spot-lit light source. Think Caravaggio once again. His work, contrast-wise, is very chiaroscuro, but the composition of light and dark shapes is more so characterized by tenebrism. You see some of that same theatric lighting situations in Rembrandt's as well. Thomas asks, actually, Dale, did that answer your question pretty good? Good. So Thomas asks, or Thomas says, the paper we recommend is expensive. Yeah, the Roma paper isn't the cheapest. Is there a best place to buy it? Yes. Talas, Talas. Talas would be your best source to get it. Years ago, we would have to import it directly from Fabriano. We'd have to import it directly from Italy. And yes, it was even more expensive. Talas is located in New York. I think a sheet of Roma paper is between $16 and $18 right now. But it's a beautifully handmade cotton rag paper. It holds and handles the natural charcoal so much better than many of the more machine manufactured, kind of hot press papers. Well, that was about all of the questions I see in the chat. Does anybody else have any questions? I think I had one from from the school. Give me just 1 second. Let me see if I can bring this up. Is Agnes here? Okay, Agnes isn't here, but she asks a question via email. I just wanted to make sure that I devote some time to ask those questions. In the future, if you can't make it for one of the AMAs, you're always welcome to email some questions and we can answer those as well. So she asks, what are the best hues to mix with walnut oil or walnut oil, stand oil, or a resin medium, maybe oleo gel, Canada balsam, or best hues for safflower oil to slow everything down? I would avoid safflower oil altogether. Just avoid it. Even high oleic varieties of it, I'm just not a fan of it's on the verge of being like more of a semi-drying oil. Big swatches filled with bound in pure safflower oil have the tendency to weep. They don't dry as thoroughly or as quickly as, let's say, linseed oil. And because of that delayed or prolonged oxidative polymerization, which is that's how our paint dries. It goes from a liquid to a solid. Liquid linseed oil or vegetable oil, drying oil, ends up becoming a solid. It goes through a process of oxidative polymerization. So all of those little oil molecules end up linking together to create a polymer before going through full oxidative polymerization and creating a solid. That solid is called linoxin. Best colors to use for walnut oil. The only one that I would honestly recommend to fully bind, make into full paint would be lead white. Walnut oil has a tendency to dry a little bit more soft, spongy. It's not as hard or resilient as linseed oil is. Don't ever believe anything that says that linseed oil yellows more than walnut oil. They yellow the same amount. It differs in rate though. Walnut oil is going to yellow slower than linseed oil, but when you artificially age the oils, you find that they both will get just about as dark. So walnut oil and linseed oil are going to yellow just about the same degree. Keep your pigment volume concentration kind of high. What that means is do not dilute your paints. Don't try to glaze with mediums, extra liquid type mediums, and you won't increase the amount of yellowing over time. I think if you need to slow down your paint a little bit, walnut oil is a great choice. Walnut oil is a great choice. Stay away from the safflower oil. But if you're finding that when you're using raw umber, cobalt violet, burnt umber, even lead white, if you're finding that it's just drying a little faster than you would like, a touch of walnut oil or a touch of stand oil would be good. Those lower acid value oils, they have a lower iodine value, which in simple terms means they're going to dry slower. Those can be good to just retard the drying time a little bit. But especially in the case of stand oil or vacuum bodied linseed oil, with great power comes great responsibility. You want to make sure that the quantity of any of those extra oils that you are adding into your paint is very, very small, because stand oil will dry very slow. If you're to think of it this way, there is a drying zone in between each oil molecule. And those are free flowing. That's why your regular linseed oil is such low viscosity. I actually have some oils here that I can show. So here's regular linseed oil, very thin viscosity. Here is vacuum bodied linseed oil or stand oil. You can see that it is much higher viscosity. There are drying zones between those oil molecules. The process of vacuum bodying, which requires taking all of the oxygen out and heating the oil for an extended period of time, the oil molecules start to link together, and that's what helps create that viscous texture, or viscous, more viscous oil. Because of the lack of those drying zones, we also have much slower drying. So if you accidentally add too much stand oil to your paint, or a lot of other mediums, you could probably expect wrinkling of your paint, where the outside of your paint dries faster than the body of paint, and it stays wet for too long and it deforms the surface. It's not a pretty thing. But I would, Canada Balsam, out in terms of resins, it's not the worst resin that you could use, but as a general thing, I like to keep cicative and resins out of my painting process entirely. Resins just are too, most cases, too questionable and very susceptible to solvents over the long term. They do have the tendency to yellow quite a bit. Resins also have the tendency to be redissolved. When you varnish your painting, you're introducing a solvent, and usually that solvent is used to dissolve the resin to begin with. That's problematic. When you varnish it, you expose your whole painting, and then those resins swell up, and then they shrink once that solvent leaves again. That can turn your painting to a puff pastry. That's why you want to avoid things like retouch varnish in between layers. So big problems there. Oh, great. We have a couple more questions. I think you said you work on the smooth side of the paper. Is that right? Yes, Thomas, smooth side of the paper, especially with that Roma. The rough side of the paper, you'll notice there's like a wire. They take the cotton fibers and they use like a wire mesh, and they pick it up and they cold press it. But you'll hold it up to a vertical light, you'll definitely see which side is the rougher. It's got deeper lines running through it. Question on varnish. I never used varnish before, and I bought Damar varnish aside from almost choking myself from the intensity of a smell. I realized that it doesn't change much of the property to the picture. So which terms do I have to consider when whether I should use glossy, matte, or satin? Sub question: how long can varnish extend a painting? Another sub question: can I stack varnishes so I can use like a satin and over the other one, so I can use that and then over one in order to achieve what I wish to? Oh, those are great questions. I've got a video. I've got a video for you. I did a video with natural pigments where we talked, I think, for almost 2 hours on just varnishes. You should probably just avoid the Damar varnish. The Damar or Damar, tomato. I think it's actually more pronounced Damar, but most people call it Damar. The Damar varnish has the tendency to cross-link. The reason why we want to avoid cross-linking is, I want you to think of this. Damar crystals, Damar resin is dissolved by turpentine. That was that stinky smell that you fumed yourself out of your studio with. With that, the Damar is dissolved today. It is varnished tomorrow, for example. That varnish can be removed 5 years from now, 10 years from now, but in about 20 years, 50 years beyond that, it is no longer dissolved by the same solvent. So think of this. Your painting, if you're working on a painting today and you try to wipe mineral spirits or turpentine on it tomorrow, you obviously will expect to smear and wipe away all of that paint, even if you let your paint dry for five days maybe. you shouldn't be wiping it down with mineral spirits. That's why one of the reasons why you wait to varnish a piece is because that oil has not turned to linoxin. It hasn't cross-linked and turned or gone fully through that oxidative polymerization process. That is very problematic for your varnish. Your varnish is there as a partially aesthetic thing. You want to look, you want it to represent your painting well, you want it to do things for your painting, be it satin, matte, or gloss. But the real purpose of the painting is a dust protector, a dirt protector. Every other surface in your home is going to gather dust and you're going to clean it. Your painting, you're probably not going to ideally, you wouldn't be spraying it down with things. You wouldn't be wiping it with water. For the most part, you just leave your painting alone and very gentle dusting. So the varnish is there to protect the painting from from fumes, from dirt, from dust. It also acts as a minor abrasion barrier. So certain resins are softer, certain resins are harder. They offer more of like abrasion. If you accidentally bump into the painting, or let's say you're moving a chair and it scratches into it, hopefully it only scratches the varnish, but does not actually scratch the actual painting. Now, your choice of varnish is largely an aesthetic choice where, you may want a more matte varnish, you may want a more glossy varnish. The best varnish that I know of today is a hydrocarbon varnish called Regal Res 1094. It's commonly known as Gamvar or Conservar from Natural Pigments. It's Regal Res 1094 with a UV stabilizer. UV stabilizer will prolong the lifespan of your varnish. That it won't actually protect your painting from extra UV radiation, but it will make it to where the UV radiation will not damage the varnish, because those resins do have the tendency, as any resins do, right? You see epoxy, porous resins, they have the tendency to yellow over time. Your Damar varnish is going to yellow pretty severely over time. It's going to cross-link, meaning you're not going to be able to remove it. Eventually, your varnish is going to get dirty and it's going to need to be removed and it's going to need to be reapplied. The Conservar or the Regal Res 1094 varnish does not cross-link, period. So what that means is it's dissolvable by mineral spirits today, and 100 years from now, it's still dissolvable by mineral spirits. The problem with varnishes like Damar varnishes, they cross-link, and after a certain point, they are only dissolvable by more polar solvents that also can dissolve and destroy the linoxin that's holding all of your pigments together. So damage to the painting is inevitable, even with the most skilled hands when trying to remove something like Damar. You can use a UV stabilizer in Damar, which will prolong its life to maybe like 50, 75 years, maybe 100 before it yellows. It can help decrease cracking, and it can help just reduce the darkening and yellowing of it, but it's not the best varnish to choose. You ask questions about stacking varnishes. Yes, but when stacking varnishes, you need to consider using different varnishes that are dissolvable by different solvents. For example, you could use something like a Polaroid. You can use a Polaroid varnish. I think it's dissolvable by tooling. Pretty nasty stuff. It'll fume you out. But the problem is you don't want to varnish with Damar in 2 layers. You don't want to varnish with Regal Res 1094 in 2 layers, because the same solvent that's dissolving the resin is the same solvent that's going to dissolve the resin that you just applied in your first layer of varnish. So what you want to do is look into isolating varnishes, and you'll apply one. Those typically have more of a satin appearance in general. Just to give you an idea, I may actually have a couple. So here we've got an acrylic varnish, not just for acrylic paint. It's this, like an acrylic being the resin. So this is a Polaroid B44. You could use this as an, sorry, there you go. There's a Polaroid B44 gloss varnish. Here's a Laropol solvent. It's more of a blend of solvents together, but the Laropol could be used as a good isolating. This is going to be a little bit more matte finish, and then you could top it off with Regal Res 1094. Similarly, you could, if you're making your own varnish, which Natural Pigments does sell little kits, comes with a UV stabilizer and everything. What you can do is the amount of thickness and glossiness is going to be dependent on how much resin you put into the solvent. Thicker varnishes are more glossy. They bring out the darks better. More matte varnishes are better for lighter valued pictures. Many of the French Impressionists or Impressionists in general did not like the effect that Damar varnish, which was the main varnish that they would use, other than mastic, of course. They didn't like the way that varnish, made their colors look more saturated. They liked that kind of ashy, sunken in appearance. So many times they didn't varnish their paintings, and as a consequence, their paintings became infected with dirt and dust that just simply can't, dirt and dust gets into the micro pores of the painting, and it makes it almost virtually impossible to clean out. Barnett, did that answer your questions pretty good? Good. It does sound like a robot name. Gene Keller asked one more question. How do you feel about Neo Megilp? To the best of my knowledge, we're talking about Neo Megilp from Gamblin. I'm pretty sure that's does that combined? I'm pretty sure it combines an alkyd and a safflower oil, which is like hitting the brake and hitting the gas at the same time. I may be wrong, but I don't have a lot of experience in the chemistry of that, so I can't attest for it. I personally like simplicity in painting, period. I don't fuss around with a whole bunch of things that I can't pronounce and identify. I want to know exactly what's in everything. That's why I make my paint. That's why I use natural pigments or Rublev colors, because I know there's no stabilizers and no additives to it. I want those things out of my paint. I'm linseed oil and copolymerized linseed oil, like epoxide oil, is about as far as inveterous as I'll get. And there's a lot of conservation science to back up that my paintings will age well. So Gene, I'll have to get back to you on that. Do me a favor, send me an email, and I'll do a little bit of extra research for you. Is acrylic gesso a good option for an ACM panel prep? Sure. I mean, I'm not a big fan of painting on acrylic gesso because they're typically very absorbent. I think if you're doing an acrylic painting, obviously, yeah, that's perfect. But if you're doing an oil painting, you deserve an oil ground. The best ground that I've come across, most easy to deal with, is from Rublev Colors or Natural Pigments. It's called lead alkyd ground. You will very lightly sand the enamel finish of the ACM panel and then do 2 layers of the lead alkyd ground. And it's just great. I've done that on a full 5 by 10 feet, 5 by 10 foot altarpiece. And it was just, it was so easy to do, even at that scale with a little roller. It's really great. It's fresh. It's ready to go straight out of the jar. It's not the cheapest. It's a little pricey, but it is lead. So, I mean, you can imagine that comes with the territory. Yeah, we've all had, I think, some bad experiences with Damar. Well, does anybody have any last questions? This was supposed to be Eric, can you share your recipe for Regal Res varnish? My recipe for Regal Res varnish is to use Tinuvin 292 UV stabilizer. I fill up a jar. It's actually much more simple. I fill up a jar with the resin. I weigh how much resin there are. I use the recommended amount of UV stabilizer. So I weigh the resin. If there's 100 grams of resin, it's usually 1 to 3% weight. So if you're using 100 grams of resin, you want to be using 1 to 3 grams of UV stabilizer. You apply the UV stabilizer after the resin has been dissolved by the solvent. I use a fast evaporating, high flash mineral spirits. Mineral spirits 66, I think would be a very good one. When mixing up a Rigorist 1094 varnish. When I want it more thick, what I will do is I will only apply enough solvent in the mixture to just cover the resin. I will shake it initially, and then maybe just give it a light stir over the next few days. I would put it in a warm environment, not in direct sun. And once that is fully dissolved, I will add in the UV stabilizer. From there, I have a very thick viscous varnish. I can always dilute it by adding more mineral spirits. Nothing wrong with that. That's the main difference between a finishing varnish and a retouch varnish. And honestly, you just shouldn't be using retouch varnish because you know better. You will turn your painting to a puff pastry if you're putting retouch varnish in between layers. But that's the main difference between a retouch varnish and a finishing varnish, the quantity of resin compared to solvent. When it comes to varnishing, I like to stack up a whole bunch of paintings that need to be varnished. I let them sit for a long period of time. I make varnish and I use that varnish within 30 days. After 30 days, that UV stabilizer, which is there to increase the lifespan of your varnish, the Rigorist 1094 should last over 100 years before even yellowing, especially with the UV stabilizer. So with that in mind, you can dilute that same varnish more or less, but it would be great to use it within 30 days. Dilute the varnish more for more of a matte appearance, dilute it less for more of a gloss appearance.
Thank you, Eric.
You're very welcome. Well, if there are no questions, it was a pleasure going way over time with all of you. And I hope to maybe see some of you in the online atelier. I know I see lots of you that are already in there. But please feel free to reach out to us at the school if you have any other questions, or join another one of these Ask Me Anything episodes. I believe next month I'm going to be doing it with John, which is our anatomy and figure instructor. If you are international, consider maybe taking a workshop if you do want to learn more from me. There's some portrait courses that I'm doing. There's also always the online atelier. And I highly encourage all of you to, if you're not in the Boston area, to make a small excuse to come visit us here in Boston. Go to the Museum of Fine Art and to at least just stop by, take a tour of the school, and see all that Boston has to offer. Thank you. Thank you. You're all very welcome.
Thanks, Eric.
Thanks,
You're
Eric.
very welcome.
Thank you.
Tomorrow.
Thank you. Take care. See you
Thanks,
tomorrow.
Eric.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Eric.
You're welcome. Take care.